All right, good evening. I am here with Larken Rose, the best-selling author of the book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, and a great short video on YouTube that I recommend everybody go and watch. I'll post the links in the show notes, called The Tiny Dot. Thanks for coming on, Larken.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so what is the most dangerous superstition?
Well, to jump right to the punchline, and this isn't a spoiler because it gets to it on like page 2 of my book. Basically, the belief in authority, the notion that some people can have an exemption from morality, that they can have the right to do things that the rest of us can't. Most of us recognize that that's ridiculous, except in the realm of politics and law and government, where we've been taught that these pseudo-religious rituals of elections and constitutions magically bestow on some mere mortals the right to rule. And of course, they don't just say, we're your rulers now. They say, well, we represent you and you vote for us and we have a constitutional republic. And the mythology is more complicated than when it was just divine right of kings, but now it's just divine right of politicians, and it's just as ridiculous and actually more dangerous. So almost everything I work on these days in one way or another is focusing on destroying the notion that anybody has the right to rule.
I like it. And what is anarchy? Or what is not anarchy? Another book you wrote.
Right, I made a little pamphlet called What Anarchy Isn't. Anarchy literally just means rule by no one, same way monarchy means rule by one person. It doesn't mean every man for himself. It doesn't mean survival of the fittest. It doesn't mean caveman existence. Literally, it means that there are no slaves and there are no masters. Of course, those who like power and like to rule over others want everyone else to think that anarchy is a dirty word. They want everyone else to associate it with chaos and mayhem and death and destruction and complete lack of civilization and all that. Because if people recognize that it just meant we treat each other as equals and, you know, nobody has the right to forcibly dominate everybody else and call it law, then almost everybody would go, yeah, that sounds good. Let's do that. So they have to demonize it. So you get the media version of anarchy, which is like people in masks throwing Molotov cocktails. And then you get the actual meaning of it that anarchists actually believe in, which is we're all actually equal. We all actually believe in freedom and self-ownership and non-aggression, not committing force or fraud against each other. And we don't think that elections and legislation create an exemption for morality. And that's all anarchism is. It's recognizing that the morality we all live with, you know, we all understand, you know, day by day, there are no exceptions for the people who call themselves lawmakers and law enforcers. It applies, you know, morality applies the same to them as it does to us. And that's really all it means. And what that logically leads to is there is no government. There is no ruling class. There can be organization and cooperation and all sorts of voluntary based things, but there is no coercive authoritarian ruling class.
The way I like to think of it is that anarchy is no rulers, not no rules.
Right.
And for me, that's a big part of how I got into crypto and became so in favor of it, is just that we can all cooperate in the absence of centralized direction or control over our behavior. It's moving from a coercive model of do this or else to a cooperative model of it's just in our enlightened self-interest to work together rather than against each other. And that's something that I think if you build up that from first principles to the consequences for a broader or for the world at large, I think the impact on such things as warfare would be significant. So one of the questions I wanted to follow up with is what would happen if people realized that they don't need to fund death and destruction on the other side of the globe by using the US dollar? there's an implicit, not everybody appreciates it, but there's an implicit funding there for the whims of those who rule over us, through the way that the Fed buys US government obligations, and the way that currency is created. But that's no longer the only option that people have as far as a store of value or medium of exchange. So just as a thought experiment, what would happen if people opted out of the implicit violence in the existing fiat currency system?
Well, basically the system would just evaporate. Like so many people look at authoritarian governments as this big, powerful monstrosity that we have to like do battle with. And it doesn't occur to them that we're the ones who fund it and we're the ones who vote for it. And well, some of us aren't, but we in general are the ones who support it and vote for it and fund it and go along with it and even enforce it. Like our neighbors will put on a badge and then go after those of us who disobey. If we all just step away, including from their currency, including from their taxes and also their fiat garbage and their monetary policy, which is a nice name for fraud, they don't have any power. It just evaporates. So I think a lot of people imagine that there needs to be some, giant, valiant battle between good and evil. And really the good people just have to realize, oh, maybe we should stop funding the evil and just watch them evaporate. There doesn't have to be any big, glorious anything. You pull away the obedience and you pull away the funding and they have no power. Then it's a few lunatics in a corner babbling about how everybody has to obey them and nobody's paying any attention, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, there's a great line from your book, to paraphrase, if nobody obeyed Adolf Hitler, he would just be a madman raving in the corner. And I think we can take the extreme case of Venezuela today, where they're starving, but the only people that can eat are the police and military. And if they want to eat, they need to go and enforce against their fellow citizens. With all this currency creation that's going on now, we had rampant inflation in the 1970s, and what we're gearing up for, I think, could just make that look like a tepid warm-up. So I think we're living in pivotal times in history, and it's not clear how it will shake out. But as an individual citizen, just knowing that the option exists to protect your hard-earned purchasing power in a way that didn't exist before. I mean, we had gold and silver, but those are confiscatable, whereas cryptocurrencies are not. And now there are private cryptocurrencies that no one even knows you have. I think it has potentially profound implications for the nature of power. And while protesting may feel be a form of catharsis emotionally, it may feel good, it's ultimately asking permission from your same rulers. It's asking for a longer leash. Please rule me differently. Whereas now you can simply withdraw your implied consent by not using the primary mechanism of control. So it's something that I find fascinating. Let me see, what else do I have here? Funding war. All wars historically are bankers' wars. And if you look at the work of people such as Anthony Sutton, who revealed, for example, the role of Wall Street in the City of London in World War II, or the impact of, let's say, the people related to Halliburton and the other oil companies in more recent times, you find that money and warfare are really inextricably linked to one another. So just pulling on that thread a little bit more, would we see as much conflict and militarism as we do if there weren't a built-in funding mechanism, you think?
No, war is one of the most obvious examples of conflict that is 100% fabricated by ruling classes, and they do it on purpose. Like they need us at war with each other, because if they just said, we're just going to rule you by force because we can, everyone would say no. But they have to pretend to be protected. I mean, there's a quote from Plato from like 2,000 years ago whenever a tyrant appears, at first he appears as a protector. This is nothing new. They always have to try to pass themselves off as protecting us from foreign enemies or crime or some stupid disease or this, that, or the other thing. And their answer is always lots of authoritarian power. And war is the most glaring example of something that, I mean, imagine we're living, there is no ruling class, and somebody says, hey, we have to like get together a whole bunch of people and a ton of money so we can go all the way across the ocean and kill people we don't know. Like everybody would say, no. And all the people on the other side would say no too. The idea that, well, we need a big government to protect us from invasions from other governments. They're missing the fact that the government is the problem and the other governments are the problem and our governments are the problem. And both of them are saying we need a massive war machine because of those other scary ones. And anybody familiar with history is well aware that governments start wars on purpose. Anybody who hasn't read Operation Northwoods, if you want to see the mentality of the US military and how they will literally commit terrorism against Americans to start a war, go read Operation Northwoods. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is declassified documents signed off on by the top brass at the Pentagon, where they were basically trying to start a completely unnecessary war. That's how they think. And yes, if not for the people funding it, that just wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen at all. Yes, there would still be conflicts. There would be, there might even be something up to like a family feud or something, but there isn't going to be 1 million people over here trying to kill 1 million people over there. It's just ridiculous. The only setting that happens in is where an authority convinces a bunch of people, like, you should, follow us either because we're going to protect you from whatever, or we're going to go righteously take what rightfully belongs to us. And normal people have no interest in that. There's even there's a Goebbels quote, Hitler's minister of propaganda. I think it's Goebbels, talking about how, of course, the normal people don't want war, but here's how you trick them into it. And you say you're a traitor to your country if you're not going rah, rah, rah about warmongering. So they know that normal people would never do this on their own. And if we weren't compelled to fund the machine of death and destruction, and everyone just said, yeah, none for me, thanks, it just ends. Again, there's not a big enemy you have to go defeat. We are the enemy. We're the ones falling for it and joining up to the military to go fight for freedom and glory, and then finding out, oh, we're like defending poppy fields in Afghanistan. Whoops, what did that have to do with freedom? So yeah, war is absolutely a 100% fabricated government. It's a side effect of government, just a horrendous one. And without loyalty and funding government, that's just gone. That just ends. It's not like, yeah, it's in our nature to fight over things and bicker and disagree. It's not in our nature to kill each other by the millions. That's not what we do in the absence of government.
So without a ruling class to keep us behaving civilly toward one another, you don't think we would see rape and pillage and just wanton destruction on every corner?
No, that's one of the ridiculous things. And my little pamphlet, What Anarchy Isn't, gets into this, as does my book, The Most Dangerous Superstition. The idea, and guess where this comes from? It's government pushing the idea that we're all these stupid, violent animals, but luckily politicians are here to keep us in line and make us civilized. And what people don't notice is they're all running off to the voting booths to try to vote for somebody to keep us civilized. Well, if we're violent animals, we wouldn't vote for that. We would like to be violent animals. The people who vote for government to care for the poor and vote for government to stop criminals and vote for government to protect us, those are people who want peace and justice. Trouble is, they fall for the lie that government is the source of peace and justice, when government is literally the source of the vast majority, not only of injustice, but of strife and violent conflict. Like everything it does by command. Like you were saying before, the difference between we either voluntarily organize or there's some people at the top who says, here's what you're going to do and we hurt you if you disobey. Everything government does is coercion and division, whereas the vast majority of people in their daily lives, what they try to do is have peaceful coexistence and find ways to interact without violence. And yeah, there will still be, you know, thugs and thieves here and there, a lot fewer without government, but the idea that you need a gigantic thug and thief to protect us from the little ones, I mean, it's conceptually ridiculous, but also if you open a history book, you'll see that government literally commits more theft and assault and murder and torture than everything else in the world combined. So the idea that government is protecting us from, you know, our worst nature is just ridiculous. It is an amplifier of the flaws and imperfections of humanity. It's not a guard against it.
I find it fascinating as well that everything government has, it must first steal from those who earned it honestly. And it's the only entity on the planet that is able to get away with coercively extracting resources from people. And if you extend that, we used to have things like letters patent in the British Isles hundreds of years ago, and Crown granted monopolies on certain industries. And because currency is 50% of every transaction, in 1913, a monopoly on the most important industry in the world, which is currency creation, was granted to a private corporation, the Federal Reserve, which is neither federal nor has any reserves. It's owned by rich people that nobody knows who they are. To have a monopoly granted on that, and it's backed by the force of law and implied or implicit threat of violence. It just boggles my mind. And here we are 107 years later. We have this giant parasitic goiter hanging off our neck. And it's the third time we in the United States have fallen for this trap, because we had the first bank, or the Bank of the United States, at the country's founding. Then we had the second bank of the United States. That's why I use Andrew Jackson as my avatar online, because he vanquished the second time around. And now we have it again with the Federal Reserve. How many times are we going to fall for this private central banking scam? It blows my mind. Do you think people are finally ready to throw off their shackles, maybe not of government in full, because a lot of people believe in some of the functions that it provides, and that may be the best way to organize, and it takes time to change? But do you think we might see a phase shift in how people think about money in our lifetimes? Or am I just dreaming?
No, I think we absolutely will. In fact, I think we absolutely will. Like, if you and I manage to not get suicided for a while, I think we will see large pieces of the planet inhabited by people who have given up statism entirely and actually have a voluntary society. The thing is, to me, there's the philosophy that a lot of people haven't thought out. They don't all the way understand self-ownership and non-aggression and voluntarism and all that stuff. They haven't heard the terms, but they sort of instinctively have gotten to the point where they realize that the political system is this giant leech stuck to us. It's not the way to do anything good. I think a lot of people sort of think, well, it's just there. It's going to be there forever. Whatever. We'll do what we can to get around it. But I think in the process, when enough people are willing to just ignore it and try to get around it, it really can just fall over and cease to exist. But to me, like, what I focus on, like, I am by no means an expert in crypto or financial anything, but what I mostly focus on is the belief in authority, because I think it's so important for people to be able to consider the possibility of disobeying. So, and we talked about this a little bit recently, where if government can just say it's illegal to own crypto, if everyone was of the mindset where they went, oh, golly gee, well, then I won't do that, then crypto doesn't do any good. It's like, having firearms. If government can say nobody's allowed to have firearms and everybody goes, golly gee, here's mine. Australia kind of did that recently, and I think now they may be regretting it. if the mentality of disobedience isn't there, then kind of nothing makes them free. But I think people are learning disobedience out of necessity. Like if the government is destroying everything right and left, and the value of the currency is plummeting, the Federal Reserve notes, the dollar, and people just out of necessity go, well, let's trade with something that they can't find, they can't steal, it's not constantly dropping in value, and it's really convenient, and they, you know, it's basically it's a way to not get robbed. Then I think they don't even necessarily need to have a complete and thorough philosophy about it. Just sort of the general mindset of, I don't have an obligation to let those crooks rob me. Now let's see what we can do voluntarily to be prosperous and trade and do whatever. And I think that's happening a whole lot. The philosophy is also growing, but I think just the underlying sentiment of, we are not obligated to pay tribute to these bozos, and any chance we can to dodge them and get around their stupid tentacles, we should. And just that, it may not be a complete philosophy, but that's kind of all you need to have people find ways that undermine the system until the system just goes splat. And, you know, the Roman Empire did that. The Soviet Union did that. Eventually, the black market was the whole market, and then the government just goes, and I think we're going to see the same thing in the U.S. Without everybody understanding anything like a philosophy, but just understanding, if we want to prosper or even survive, we have to do it outside the confines and the controls of these psychopaths. And I think we will absolutely see that, and see the crumbling of the dollar and the crumbling of the empire and the end of war and all sorts of things that, you know, if you asked me a decade or two ago, would I see that in my lifetime? I'd say, nice joke. No, never, never, not nearly, not a chance. And watching the increase I have in recent years of these ideas and things like crypto, now I've completely changed my mind to the point where I think we will see, it may be an ugly road between now and then. In fact, it almost certainly will be, but we will see large areas of the population that don't use government currencies, that are basically immune from authoritarian control, and actually believe in real freedom and live that way.
Well, my crystal ball is by no means clear, but what I imagine will happen is, since we're all economically interconnected, and even if you're living in the rainforest in the Amazon, then encroachments by loggers will, or the trading you need to do for the things you can't produce yourself, we're all connected through money to one another. We don't need to shoot cops. We don't need to go and burn down the central bank like they're doing in Lebanon. We don't need to do anything except choose to use the alternative form of money that better aligns with our economic self-interest on an atomic level, even if we don't understand or appreciate the philosophy behind it. And then naturally, as we've seen with Bitcoin, the people that buy into that get wealthier and wealthier and wealthier, because in the other system, the cronies are printing unlimited quantities of currency and handing it out to their friends. Depending on how much or what figures you use, there may be 20–30% more currency units, more dollars in existence than there were pre-COVID. So slicing the pie into more slices doesn't change the amount of pie. It just reduces the purchasing power of each currency unit. And so really the prospect for peaceful revolution without any conflict at all is possibly there. And I'm fascinated by the game theory of governments. We're already starting to see Iran, as an example, get into Bitcoin mining as a way to circumvent sanctions and other things that we've seen with the US-controlled SWIFT system. Imagine if governments, in their enlightened self-interest, decided to get on board before the other rats on the ship decide to get off. I mean, it really could happen. I thought 2008. I thought it was the end, but they were able to kick the can down the road 12 more years because we didn't have crypto. That was actually the genesis of Bitcoin. It includes a line. I think it was from the Times. Banks, or what is it? Chancellor announces a second bailout for banks or something like that. And Bitcoin started the revolution, but I think currencies like Epic can finish the revolution. We've had 11 years to see, well, if you have unlimited printing on the one side and you have this asset that cannot be inflated on the other, where only math governs the creation of it and it's set in stone ahead of time, then you have this 10x phenomenon of a penny to 10 cents to a dollar to $10 to, we'll probably see $1 million Bitcoin. And of course, by then the dollar will be worthless. So yeah, as bleak as it is out there, voices like yours and probably mine, now that I'm talking about this type of stuff, will be censored, so it's hard to reach people. But I think just self-interest of people not having a choice. They can't afford to be raped and robbed as much as before.
Yeah, and I think that we are up against a sort of huge mental inertia. Like the vast majority of people, they have no idea how money works, as you well know. And so they look at their wallet and go, gee, prices went up. They have no idea why. They just sort of think, I guess that's something that just sort of happens. And even in countries where there's hyperinflation and their currency just turns into completely worthless, most of them just sort of just stammer and wander around not knowing what to do because they understand nothing about currency. So I think there's going to be a bunch of people in really bad shape when the dollar nosedives because they won't know what to do, except that there are other people who can actually say, here's what to do. There's a thing to step to instead. You don't have to just sit on that sinking ship till you're on the bottom of the ocean. There is a different way to trade. And, people can barter and use silver and gold and stuff and do sort of the old-fashioned way. But if you want to have anything like a specialized complex economy, you need something where you don't have to physically be in front of the person to trade with them because that's, massively limiting. And so once again, I think when it gets bad enough, out of necessity, people are going to learn about cryptos and Epic and things like that and realize, oh, you can just do this. Because there's so much of what I do has to do with human psychology and how it's used to enslave people. People look at these green pieces of paper and they think, well, this is money and this is what you trade with. They don't know why. They don't know whether it's backed by anything. They don't even think about that. They just think, well, everybody thinks this is money, so it is. And I've never heard of that thing, so it isn't. And so that's sort of the inertia we're up against. But when the government screws things up bad enough, suddenly people have an incentive to think for a few minutes and realize nobody wants these anymore. There must be a better way to trade. And then, then it'll be up to people like you to say, excuse me, we have a better way already. It's over here. And I think for a lot of people, they won't go there until they're pushed there, by necessity. In the meantime, a bunch of us who know a little bit about currency and the fraud that governments do by way of the currency and everything else can build it up and start it going so that it's there for the people when they figure out this ship is sinking, maybe we need to be on something else. So it's I think it will be ugly on the way there because people tend to keep doing whatever they're used to no matter how badly it works, but at some point they do realize we have to do something if we want to not die. And so somewhere between now and dying, most people will suddenly realize we have to do something other than what government tells us to do.
It's really interesting. A lot of people associate crypto with nefarious activities, and that if you are into that sort of thing, then you must be some sort of criminal. But the laws have actually been made super clear, over, at least in the United States, over the past few years, where things such as taxation and reporting requirements, I mean, you can be completely compliant and still preserve all of your wealth. You can have your IRA or retirement account own your crypto. You can take a loan against your crypto so you don't have to sell it and recognize the gain. And that's not taxable. So we're really getting into an environment where there's no real reason, aside from a lack of awareness or inertia, as you put it, for people not to at least put their toe in the water. I mean, we pay for insurance all the time. Imagine if you have a portfolio and you take 1% of that and allocate it to this fantasy internet money that might turn out to be just a bunch of hocus pocus. If you're wrong, you only lose 1%. If you're right, maybe that's the difference between starving or not. And I think we'll see tremendous fortunes get created, just like in the 1930s, where that chaos led to some multi-generational dynasties being established by the decisions that the people made then. It's the same thing here. And it's not even that speculative or risky to just project out what has happened in the first 11 years now, because it's been that long of Bitcoin, to what might happen to similar assets that follow the same math. Because at the end of the day, it is math that governs the emission of these things. And in contrast to the dollar, where there's just mandarins in mahogany paneled, cigar smoke filled rooms with snifters of brandy, like the Monty Burns from The Simpsons, like, ha ha, like, how much money should we print for ourselves today? No, like, it was set in stone at the outset. It's beyond the machinations of man. It's really, really exciting. Well, I appreciate everything that you do to open up minds and raise awareness of a less violent, more human way that we all can interact with one another. How can people find out more about you and your work?
Well, my YouTube channel, which is just YouTube/Larken Rose, has a gazillion different videos people can check out. And my book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, is on Amazon. We also now have a thing called The Rose Channel, which is therosechannel.com, which is a subscription thing where Amanda and I do videos, and our Candles in the Dark seminars there, and all sorts of things like that. And I mostly would point people towards my videos on YouTube, which are all free, just because it's such an uncomfortable shift for most people to go to the just bleeding obvious state of realizing you don't have an obligation to do what a bunch of political crooks tell you to do. And to quick jump back to what you said about they're trying to paint it like, if you use Bitcoin, you're some horrible, creepy criminal. They do that every time there's any threat to them. If you want to have a gun, it's obviously because you want to run around randomly shooting people, not because you want to defend yourself. And so the people who want power will always pretend that freedom results in chaos and mayhem and death and destruction, including financial freedom. And it's just utterly stupid if you look at the history of, even if you just look at the value of the dollar over the past 100 years, like, what could you buy with it to begin with, and what can you buy now? And I have a very simple video called How to Be a Crook that I made that's about the Federal Reserve thing. I don't usually talk about the currency stuff because other people know more about it and do a better job. But I did that just to give people a crash course. But I think so many people, they need the first step, because we're not trained to think about these things. We're not taught about these things, philosophy or currency or anything of the sort. We're just taught, here's how to be on your little hamster wheel and make lots of money for your owners, government. And the world could be unrecognizably better if people just learn to think a little bit outside the box and start to realize, we don't need rulers, and we don't need their stupid money. and we don't need all the limitations they stick on all our choices. They're not doing that for our benefit. They're not doing that to protect us. They're not forcing us to use their garbage currency that's constantly plummeting in value for our own good and for the stability of the economy, blah, blah, blah. They're doing it for money and power. And all we have to do to take that away from them is use something else. So I was thrilled to hear about Epic and how it works. And again, I'm by no means an expert on this stuff, but for a while I've been thinking Bitcoin is really cool and it won't be the end. It was a great start, and there will come up things that, people can use to try to manipulate this or that or the other things. And people who know a hell of a lot more about it than me, like you, are going to find ways to make it better and make it what it should be. And that will enable the rest of us, including me, to undermine the system just by doing something that's moral and plain and obvious and ethical and a way for us to treat each other as equals. And so that's really great to see, and I'm looking forward to see what Epic does.
Yeah, well, for those who come from your world rather than my world that don't know about Epic, the nutshell version of how it's different than Bitcoin is, number one, that all transactions are private. Nobody can see how much money you have, how you got it, who you spent it with. Just everything is completely private by default, with no extra steps involved or no extra cost. And the other exciting part is that you can mine it on an ordinary home computer without any special equipment required, which is something that in Bitcoin you need very special, expensive equipment. So there's important implications for who has the wealth in this new era, because 85% or so of the Bitcoin that will ever exist already exists. And if you missed that boat, you're too late. Not only is it $12,000 a coin, but you also can't mine any of the new ones in your house that are getting created, where there's only 8 million Epic in existence. And over the next 8 years that it takes for the supply curve to catch up with Bitcoin, those 10 million are up for grabs on ordinary home computing devices, and even mobile phones by this time next year or even sooner. You'll be able to plug in an old cell phone that's in your drawer or while it's charging on Wi-Fi at night, and get a small piece of the seniorage benefits that normally are reserved only to our elite overlords. So it's really, the way I look at it is that Bitcoin started the revolution and Epic is here to finish it. What we created is intended to be the people's money, and the realization of Satoshi's, the creator of Bitcoin's original dream, which is a peer-to-peer electronic cash system where you don't have to trust anyone. You don't have to allow things like negative interest rates, withholding taxes. If you want to comply, you can, but you don't have that. What am I looking for? You don't have that built in as a mechanism where someone can just go in and take your money from you. So it really puts the power back in the individual person's hands. And I hope that that'll pave the way for us to interact with each other in a more peaceful way. Also, fraud is an increasing problem in legacy banking. If you're a small business, there's a tremendous amount of losses due to credit card fraud, where people use stolen IDs, or they got your information on the dark, or on the dark web or whatever. And so as a merchant, if you have no chargebacks due to fraud and no fees, and you get your money instantly, then I'm hoping that individual merchants are another vector of change, where at the point of sale, you increasingly see, well, if I'm going to take this garbage money, I'm going to charge you a higher price because it's less convenient and more risky and more costly for me to take that form of money than this other form of money. So anyway, thanks for being on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
All right.